All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started in just a second. All right, so thank you to everyone for being here today. My name is Casey Kadams, and I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Alliance. Very exciting. Thank you for being with us today. For those who are less familiar with us, which may not apply to the folks in this room, we are a coalition of 24 U.S. governors who represent collectively nearly 60% of the U.S. economy and nearly 55% of the U.S. population. And our reach extends across every region of the country. Our states are laboratories of bold, innovative solutions to tackle the climate crisis, and we're leading the world. And our role at the Alliance is to ensure that those solutions are scaled up and shared across states to extend and expand your impact. Communities across America are reaping the benefits. Our states are outpacing the rest of the country. We are achieving lower levels of air pollution, delivering more energy savings to businesses and families. We're employing more clean energy workers, preparing more effectively for climate impacts and disasters, generating more electricity from zero carbon sources, and the list goes on. We know that climate action means better health, more jobs, and a brighter future. And we also know that collaboration with the federal government and states is key because we've seen the alternative. Our coalition was formed in 2017 in response to the prior administration yanking the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement and stepping away from the global stage. We kept the U.S. on track during those 4 years, but we know we can go so much farther and so much faster when we do it together. And that's why we're here today on this stage. Today we have a re-engaged federal government, and in the years ahead, under the Inflation Reduction Act, the U.S. is going to be making the most significant climate investments in our nation's history. And you'll hear today just how fired up our governors are to deliver on the promise of that law. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first governor, who is relentlessly pushing New Mexico forward. She is getting more zero-emission vehicles on roads, conserving 30% of New Mexico's lands and waters by 2030, ensuring 100% of the state's electricity is carbon-free. She's doubling the renewable energy leases on state trust land, modernizing the grid, delivering nation-leading rules to curb methane in the oil and gas sector. And after last Tuesday's election, she's going to be leading the climate charge for 4 more years. So please join me in welcoming Governor Lujan Grisham.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. And my job to start is to do quick introductory remarks, but you gave them. So this is really exciting to not only participate today in COP, but to make sure that as we are all recommitted to doing everything in our power to reduce emissions and to reinvest in any number of industries and policy-making avenues that continue not just to address what have been headwinds in climate change, but to show real examples. And maybe what we'll get a chance with the Inflation Reduction Act investment, it is a game changer, because the issues for other states or regional coalitions have been there's not enough money to invest. We don't have the right incentives for the private sector, and so it's really easy to stay on that merry-go-round and never get off. So I'm incredibly inspired by that. The commitment for the U.S. Climate Alliance means there's more productive investment, policymaking, and regulatory baselines that we can then assist every state to implement, which I think is a game changer, no matter who's leading what state where. And like the infrastructure bill or act, which is providing just in New Mexico, largely in climate work, is about $700 million, which for a state whose whole budget is just over $8 billion, it's a bunch of money, and allows us to be incredibly aggressive and innovative. I have no doubt that the inclusion of the Inflation Reduction Act is going to force every state, because the private sector is going to want those opportunities in those states. For the first time, sort of a political agenda is out of the equation, particularly on this important issue, because the investment strategies transcend that for the first time in any of our, I think, political histories, and certainly for the first time ever as a unifier in the United States. So I'm really delighted to get to further that conversation about specific things that we are doing and launching, and the ways in which the states, without those investments, we're leading the effort, can benefit from that and help the country move faster and help other nations to collectively do the same set of strategies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So next up, we're going to introduce a leader who 5 years ago had the vision and fortitude to launch this Climate Action Coalition. And he hasn't just elevated the climate issue, he has delivered. Like Governor Lujan Grisham, he's showing that in Alliance states, the future isn't tomorrow, it's today. It's here and now. And in Washington state, thanks to his leadership, that future includes 100% clean power, decarbonized transportation, a nation-leading cap and invest program, and as of last week, heat pumps in all new buildings, including homes and apartments. And Washington is centering all of this action around its commitment to environmental justice and worker protections. So it's my privilege to introduce America's climate governor and someone who gave me my first job 13 years ago, Governor Jay Inslee.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, listen, that was a good hire, Casey. Believe me, that was a really good hire 13 years ago. I just have three things to say. Number one, I am tired of being called a subnational by the United Nations. We, in fact, governors, mayors, city council people, we know states can move farther and faster than any nation state, no matter how good they are. We are, in fact, supranationals, and the next time somebody calls us a subnational, I'm going to start a competitive group that's going to compete with the United Nations, and we'll show them how to save the planet Earth. That's what we're going to do. So I'm tired of this happy talk here. We're going to compete with nation states. The second thing I want to say is, this is the best COP ever, and I'll tell you why. We are in a magic moment on the struggle for the planet Earth. And we are in a magic moment because the level and obviousness of the crisis has now been met with our ability to actually move forward with developing a clean energy economy. That's a magic moment, a tipping point that we're at. Now, driving down here yesterday when we got back from the airport, I saw a sign that said something like, "From aspiration to action." And that's what the U.S. Climate Alliance is doing. We have passed the point of aspiration. We are at the point of action. And that's what all of these states are doing to actually bring action to the forefront of this mission statement, every state in its own way. And these states are the winners in the clean energy action-oriented mission statement, because we are growing our economies faster than the states that are not part of this action-oriented alliance. We are the winners on this, not just an environmental prospect, but the economic prospects. The third, it is a moment of joy to be in this alliance, to now have a federal partner under the leadership of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Gina McCarthy. It is a joy to be in this partnership. They have brought $350 billion investment, and we're going to partner with them to really move the needle. But I want to mention the scale of our part of that partnership. Look, Allie and the President and Gina have pulled a rabbit out of the hat. This is a fantastic federal bill. But if you look at the investment in my state on a per capita basis, we are matching that federal investment. So we are 50% of this mission statement in this alliance if every state reached our level of commitment, which they shortly will. So it's a great moment to be alive. It's a great moment to be in this partnership. How about a round of applause for President Joe Biden for what he's done? It's been fantastic.
Well, that's a great segue, Governor. So finally, our third guest today, we're so fortunate to be joined by him. He is one of our top allies in the Biden administration and someone who knows the power of states firsthand. Before arriving at the White House, he served in the New York state government, leading the state's efforts on climate change and clean energy. And today, as the National Climate Advisor, he is coordinating and driving action across the federal government, which is no small task. And he's working with us at the state level to achieve our shared goals. He'll be playing a key role as we all work together to implement the IRA, and we're absolutely thrilled to call him our partner and can't wait to get even more done in the years ahead. So please welcome our National Climate Advisor, Ali Zaidi.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, let me start with the legislative accomplishments that we've seen just in the time since Glasgow. The bipartisan infrastructure law, $50 billion for resilience, $15 billion for grid modernization, enough funding to build electric vehicle charging from coast to coast. All 50 states, by the way, have submitted plans to get that money. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in clean energy and climate in the history of America, maybe the world, and enough to deliver a gigaton of emissions reductions or more if we get after it. And I think it's been possible because we've had profound leadership in the House and in the Senate and in the Oval Office, President Biden. But it's also been possible because of the work our governors have been doing, not just in the last 2 years, but in the years prior. I remember back in the Obama days, the first Recovery Act in 2009, when we used to talk about green jobs, they sounded like they were jobs on another planet. But thanks to the work of the governors on this stage and many of you, those are jobs that electricians and welders and steel workers and auto workers are now doing. So when we talk about clean energy, it doesn't sound like jobs on another planet. It sounds like an opportunity to put steel in the spine of our middle class and strengthen it after years and years of disinvestment. So the reason we have the Inflation Reduction Act, the reason we have the bipartisan infrastructure law is because of the work that this coalition has been doing. And to talk very specifically about the folks on the stage, when we were working on the bipartisan infrastructure law, the president literally said, call Governor Lujan Grisham and her team. They're the ones that are capping all the wells. We got to figure out how to do that nationwide. Let's go learn from them. And by the way, we're never done learning from the state of New Mexico. Our methane rule that we just proposed earlier this week, or maybe it was last week, time is a blur, built on the learnings from the program in New Mexico. And then, Earth Day, I hitched a ride with the president to Seattle, Washington. We joined the governor to sign an executive order to save our old growth forests. By the way, nature is going to be part of the solution on climate change. It must be. But we sat there and we not only learned about the work on the ground, things like how to make green transit great transit, but also tactically worked with Governor Inslee on how we sell this work and make sure that what became the Inflation Reduction Act gets passed. So these are folks without whom we would literally not be here in this moment, feeling the sense of optimism and hope that we have. So a round of applause for them. But thank you. Let me say two more things, and then I'll get it back to Casey. We're in the decisive decade for climate action. That's what the science tells us. That's what we see in our communities, in the fires and in the floods and in the droughts, a sense of urgency that we must move out right now, not only to deal with the crisis, but tap into the opportunity. But what does the decisive decade mean? The decisive decade can't mean more analysis, more plans, more blue ribbon commissions. It has to mean delivery. So in the Biden administration, the challenge from the president, and by the way, if you're a governor or mayor, you can't do anything other than deliver. But in our Washington, not yours, in our Washington, oftentimes people just settle for words. In this administration, we're not going to do that. There are over 60 million homes in America that are powered by clean electrons right now. 1 out of 7 of those hooked up to clean electricity in the last 2 years. So what we're doing is making a difference. We've just got to go 2 and 3 and 4 times faster. Delivery also means not just going after the low-hanging fruit. I was talking to Bob Bullard today, an incredible leader on environmental justice, and he said, we can't just go after the low-hanging fruit. We got to climb the tree and capture all of the opportunity here. So that means making sure we tap into the possibility of climate-smart agriculture. That means making sure we're investing in our forests and our oceans, making sure that we're going after the opportunity in the industrial sector, something we used to call hard to decarbonize. We work with Casey and the team here. We had 25 states at the White House just 2 weeks ago talking about Buy Clean and how we scale that up. Clean steel, clean cement, clean glass in the way we purchase. So we've got to go after every single sector, and we've got to deliver in all of them. And the last point I'll make on this, delivery must mean not only harnessing the macroeconomics that we've built, right? There's a lot of capital flow going in the right direction. Not only harnessing the microeconomics of where we can go now, because solar and wind and storage and heat pumps are all cheaper than they've ever been before and more competitive than fossil fuel alternatives. The decade of action, the decade of delivery must also mean investing in the political economy that got us here. And political economy, that's a real thing, right? We've seen backsliding and backtracking and diluted ambition before. We've seen it in a spectacular scale in the United States of America. So this must be the moment where if you're a labor organizer, you're an environmental justice organizer, you're a young person, you live in rural America or urban America, that you see yourself in this transformation and in this set of solutions, and you see this as a moment to be hopeful and not cynical, that clean energy and tackling the climate crisis will be the thing that lifts us up and brings us together and moves us forward. That's part of the decade of action. That's got to be part of the decade of delivery. And to me, that's what All In is all about. So I'm grateful to be here, to get a chance to celebrate the leadership of these governors, to celebrate the leadership of all of you, and to get after the challenge that we've got in front of us, which is to harness the maximum of the opportunity we have in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. So Ali literally confirmed at the absolute last minute, in the sense that we stole just like 15 minutes of his time last night at 10 p.m. So thank you for joining us. We're going to just one more round of applause for Ali, who's going to have to head out. So I think what I would like to start with is just a discussion and a framing of why we're here talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. It includes huge sums of money for states. It's, I think, often thought of as a federal bill, but it's a state climate bill in so many ways, which means that state climate leadership is really important. And this has obviously been a really exciting week for the re-election of governors across the U.S. Climate Alliance, including in New Mexico. So congratulations, Governor, for 4 more years. So I was wondering if you could start us off. Tell us a little bit about what does it mean for implementation of IRA, implementation of IIJA, and other federal resources to have climate champions in states like New Mexico?
Well, that's an interesting way to ask the question. I hope what it means for New Mexico that New Mexicans want to stay on track for tackling the climate crisis and are more meaningfully engaged. And I'm excited about that. We're the second largest oil and gas producer in the United States. So we're in a very interesting juxtaposition. So we've set very high renewable energy standards. We decarbonized our utility sector. We are working now to decarbonize transportation. We need to decarbonize agriculture. We need to get it at the smallest level, at the largest level. What the IRA has done, the Inflation Reduction Act, is that, and I think for all governors, not just governors who have followed my colleague Jay Inslee's leadership, because not admitting that would tell you it was much easier for us to move as quickly as we did, because we looked at two states in particular. We looked at the aggressive CO2 reduction in emissions and the investments in climate infrastructure in Washington State. And then we looked at some of the oil and gas standards in Colorado. And then you decide what you should do, race to the top. How could we do, I'll use Colorado as an example, how can we have stricter standards with more meaningful outcomes, learning from what works really well there and the things that they've struggled with so that we don't make those same mistakes. The Inflation Reduction Act for the U.S. Climate Alliance and folks who are not yet members does, for me, three things. One, it makes every governor or policymaker less risk adverse, because it's not just their state resources where every aspect is competing. So take New Mexico as another example. Before I was governor, closer to 75% or higher of our annual revenue is oil and gas. It means that no one is interested, and of course it pays for all of our public education, and that some would argue today it's paying for our free college program, which is the most robust program in the country, because it's no wrong door to higher education. Today it's 53% of the budget, which shows that our renewable energy investments, including new jobs on the ground, and every single one of our sectors, we have the fourth best economy year over last in the country, where we're typically the poorest state with the worst economy and the highest unemployment. We're also dropping our unemployment faster now than any other state, and unemployment's at a 14-year low, largely from these innovations and strategies in tackling climate. So now the Inflation Reduction Act, that's one, so you're less risk adverse, and we can demonstrate that these things really work for your economy. And again, now you got not just a federal incentive, but largely 100% of that initiative. Two, it creates an opportunity for the private sector to engage in every single place. So every locality in our state, every state, regional work, state by state work, and every single industry, no wrong door. I think that capitalization in that regard strengthens and moves our efforts so much faster. And third, for particularly the West, it really builds on the leadership of Governor Inslee and others in creating regional partnerships. So we've got a regional effort for hydrogen. Now with the Inflation Reduction Act, we have regional efforts tied to the Colorado River and doing water management, both from the production of energy or lack thereof, because we don't have enough water to do that, but looking at more initiatives in geothermal and related climate-saving energy efforts. And those regional aspects, we're part of the West. Now it's Rev West, which is doing a regional effort for electric vehicles. Those tax credits for new or used means that that regional partnership gets bolder and bigger faster. So those are three key areas. I think you're going to see incredible growth in our work to reduce emissions and to create real job growth and a brand new renewable plus. I call it the plus energy market because it's all of the above. So I'm really excited, and that's what it does for governors like me and I hope some new governors after this election.
I hope so too. So Governor Inslee, sort of building on the idea of sort of learning from lessons of the past, you have the unique distinction of having served or being in your third term, having won 3 terms as governor. I was wondering if you might speak a little bit about any thoughts you have on how governors entering their second terms or their third terms learn from the experiences that they've had before, learn from the experiences of other governors. You know, did you feel like in your entering your second term you had learned something that you were able to sort of apply to go even further and faster the next time?
Yeah, there's only one benefit of age, and that's making a lot of mistakes and learning from them. And certainly I've been around the bush. This is my 5th or 6th COP. This is like stream of consciousness. So I haven't really thought deeply about this question. Casey, you should have told me you were going to ask me this before you put me up on this. I would say several things. One, I've learned that there's only 2 magic, totally renewable fuels that we humans have. One is perseverance. And I think when it comes to fighting climate change, that's the number 1 most important renewable resource. That you have to persevere in this effort. This is the hardest challenge humans have ever faced. We've been around for, thousands of generations. But it's the hardest challenge because we have built an economy based on fossil fuels. Our entire economic structure for centuries now, for 150 years, have been based on fossil fuel. And we've got to essentially eliminate it now. And in order to do so, we have to recognize that we're up against an invisible threat. You cannot see carbon dioxide, and it's killing us very, very slowly. So this is the hardest threat humans have ever had to deal with. And in order to deal with that, we have to recognize it's not going to be solved by any one bill or any one governor or any one nation state. And so the ultimate renewable energy source is perseverance. And you have to persevere. You got to come to multiple COPs. You got to lose some elections to come back. You got to fight for every state legislative race you can get to get the last 10 votes to elect a leader. Look, I'm fighting to get the last 10 votes in the 42nd legislative district in the state of Washington right now so that we don't backslide on the work that we're doing. So number 1, I would say it's the importance of perseverance. The second, I would say, is both the necessity and the righteousness of optimism. And here's why I'm optimistic. Look, I visited the Colosseum in Rome on the way here, and then the Great Pyramids a couple days ago. We have to believe that if they could build the Great Pyramids with this unbelievable mathematic precision 4,000 years ago, that we can build better silicon anode batteries to extend battery range in electric cars by 15 or 20%. And guess what? That's exactly what we're doing. We have 2 companies in Washington State now building manufacturing or planning manufacturing plants for silicon anode batteries. We got a $100 million investment from the federal government to help to do that. And we're super optimistic of being able to do these things. So you put the power of perseverance married to an attitude of optimism, and you've got what we've got, which is a tipping point of building a clean energy economy that we are now experiencing. So that's what I've learned. Now the third thing I learned is, Michelle and I know this, you can win elections by being for clean energy. Michelle got elected talking about wind turbines. I got elected in 2012 talking about solar and wind turbine elections. We won great state elections and national elections last week, electing people who get it on clean energy. We're rocking it, and I'm happy to be here.
Cheers to that, absolutely. So the two of you also, in addition to being governors, have the distinction of being former members of the U.S. House of Representatives, which is a little unique. And Governor Inslee, you even had the pleasure to be there during the last major time that the House tried to pass major climate legislation in 2009. So we'll start with Governor Lujan Grisham. As former members of Congress, how does it feel to see the U.S. finally succeed in delivering major climate legislation that's now projected to reduce emissions by about 40%? And are there any lessons we should learn to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success for the next major climate legislation?
I'm delighted by that success, and I don't think that President Biden and Vice President Harris get enough credit for delivering on every major significant accomplishment, and they have. And I was, when I was in Congress, we were in the minority, and even if we'd been in the majority, for the majority of my career, that was the former president who made it clear that any climate legislation was dead on arrival. So this has been an extraordinary effort when, and I think that you might have talked about that a little bit, Jay, in the last panel. You know, the press consistently is, we're not bipartisan, focuses on when they can't get things done or they can't get bipartisan votes on a particular piece of legislation. But the fact of the matter is, it's passed. And they did have bipartisan votes on the infrastructure bill. And it's the combination of those two things and many others that creates the perfect environment for the United States to basically superpower our efforts now tackling the climate crisis and being innovative. And I see no reason actually to beat the 40% emission standards. And I think most states will look to do that. We've seen a 40% reduction in our greenhouse gases in just the methane and ozone efforts since 2005, and are going to continue that effort moving forward. And I think that even in our Energy Transition Act, we've seen our utility companies beat the goals that we set for them at 2030, 2040. I mean, they're on track to do that based on the information that we have to date. So that's incredibly empowering. And I'll do the opposite. When you have not a single Republican member of Congress who voted on the largest single investment and effort towards climate, addressing the climate crisis, that means that you've got a lot of recalcitrant and individuals who are running on exactly the opposite. I won't do it. And I'm going to continue to represent a inappropriate, in my view, faction. We will never do it. And I think that tells us we have a lot more work to do changing the minds of far too many policymakers, even after Tuesday's elections. But again, having those investment tools in large part should start to transcend that those policymakers can't be as influential because the private sector will drive that. And that at some point we should catch up so that there isn't anyone, irrespective of party, who's ever elected in the United States again, who isn't squarely focused on this issue and who isn't committed to doing more about it. I think you end up there. So it's one of those bittersweet. It's incredible. We should be celebrating it more. We should be giving recognition to those leaders more often. But it's a stark recognition that there wasn't a single Republican vote in either the House or the Senate in an institution that should be, and as a result is widely viewed as the policy bearers for the United States. So we have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. So, Governor Inslee, I'm going to let you build on that if you'd like to, and to inspire you. What do you have any reflections on what made this time different? I think all of us can agree that the IRA was the start, not the finish, right? This shouldn't be the last time we see Congress act on climate. So, any reflections on what made this time different from previous attempts at federal legislation, and how do we build a pathway towards further action?
Well, I don't think it was a lack of leadership. We had Nancy Pelosi, who was one of the most amazing leaders in the history of mankind, and Barack Obama, and and Barack Obama, who was all on board and doing the best he could. And so we got the bill through the House, did not get through the Senate. Of course, we had to face a filibuster problem and couldn't find a way around that. But I think it's mostly a reflection of what I talked about in my opening comments. This magic moment has arrived where, unfortunately, the consciousness of Americans have been raised by the daily forest fires, hurricanes, giant precipitation events, die-offs in our oceans because of acidification, where we can't grow baby oysters right now because of ocean acidifications. We have just been smacked in the face every 6 o'clock if you're still watching the news, and every 30 seconds if you're watching social media. If Americans have been confronted with this, what used to be just a graph. When we were doing this bill, Casey, we had a graph that would show people, look how bad this is. Now it's a forest fire on the 6 o'clock news almost every weekly. That's number one on the catastrophe side. But we also now are being able to show people job creation in their neighborhoods happening today. These are not green jobs of the future, they are jobs today. There are car manufacturing jobs in Michigan that Gretchen Whitner has done fantastic work on clean energy. The wind turbine jobs that Michelle has so promoted so successfully. In my state, I can't go to a county in my state where we are not having job creation today. In Moses Lake, Washington, which is still kind of a red political district in eastern Washington, where we have these 2 silicon anode plants going on. In South Seattle, where we're building the largest fuel cell engines that can power a locomotive today. Right now in Arlington, where we've had the first electric airplane being built. So that combination, those 2 lines on the graph have crossed at this moment. And that's why I think fundamentally that's why we've been able to get this job done, together with great strategic work in the Senate and the President's resolute leadership. And it's going to continue. But I want to reiterate, fantastic as this federal bill has been, it is not enough to meet our climate goals. We have to recognize that. And for the foreseeable future, the states have to go faster and farther than this federal legislation. It is simply not enough. We will not meet, repeat, it's great that we've got back into the Paris game, but we will not meet it unless governors push further progress in their states. And the states are the only place for the next several years where that will be possible. So having states move forward with carbon market plans like I have, with low carbon fuel standards, with building codes. Let me give you an example. In building codes, last week, because of the genius of Alita Annalisa, who's here today, got our building code council to move forward to make sure that every single building starting in 2023, both residential and commercial, is going to have a heat pump, which means you don't have to import fossil fuel natural gas into your buildings. Fantastic building codes. We're the first state that's been able to pull that off, and we hope every state will follow us ultimately. That is the kind of progress that is absolutely necessary, that can only be achieved in the foreseeable future by governors and state legislators. That's why we need to keep the Alliance doing great work.
Definitely agree with that. So we've got a few minutes just for a few closing remarks, but I'm going to give you a question that I'd love for you to touch on with the few minutes that we've got remaining. So, and this speaks to your point just now, Governor. As members of the U.S. Climate Alliance, Washington and New Mexico are part of a broader coalition of 24 governors and 24 states, all working together to advance climate action. And part of the way that we do that is we promote collaboration. You spoke about this earlier, partnership, peer learning, and even friendly competition to increase one another's ambition and encourage one another to go further faster. So how do you think collaboration with your fellow governors is going to help us deliver on the promise of IRA and then take the next step to go even further? And we'll start with you, Governor Lujan Grisham.
Well, I feel like I keep repeating myself, so I apologize, but it really is exciting to see the kind of investment strategies that will now be readily available, that not only lend themselves to getting that now in a statutory design so that they stay in a state and only get improved. But I think about looking to not only these regional coalitions that I think we've got one developed on hydrogen, another one's coming in water, another one's already here for electric vehicles in the West. But frankly, I think about the National Governors Association ought to have a list of major investments, investors, strategies for green banks, leveraging all of our now green investment efforts so that you can see who's coming in where, what they're doing, what their experience is, how quickly you can reorganize your own state structure. I mean, one of the challenges for the federal government in the Inflation Reduction Act is that, and it puts money in every single federal state agency. And every single one of those is going to create their own rules. I mean, largely that happened in the infrastructure bill as well. So for states to think about ways to more centralize both our requests and our ability to get that investment into the state so that you're removing barriers to getting it all done and leveraging every single aspect, including we need states to be more aggressive, at least in my opinion, about how we revamp the regulatory environment, both at the federal level and at the state level, because it really is still a fossil fuel regulatory environment. So permitting and innovation gets stalled because we're still using an antiquated set of regulatory environments and codes. And I think you could look to states like Washington State and New Mexico, where we could be partnering up, which will also mean the federal government will move more quickly, which is how we got to the federal government taking largely our methane standards. Because Colorado showed me they could do it with fossil fuel industries. We took it 10 steps further. Federal government can take it 100 steps further. And then we create an environment where no state is below that federal standard ever again, and we do that for every regulatory environment. So I think that's what the future can and should look like. I think that's how governors can partner up. I think that's how we can use, for example, the National Governors Association. And last, I would have governors push the national legislative groups and associations to take on those same robust efforts so that we're creating our own parallel work, and that'll move us faster as well. Thank you.
No, I think that's great, because one of the most important ways that governors work together is by speaking with a collective voice. Absolutely. Governor Inslee, any sort of thoughts on collaboration with your fellow governors as we move forward with implementation of IRA, and how do we work together?
Well, my thoughts are that it works. It can really help. So, we've pulled out this progress on building codes, and now other governors, staffs will be calling Anna and say, Anna, how'd you pull this off? What were the challenges? How did you overcome them? And you just share ideas on that. We poach good ideas. So the collaboration really does have an impact. But competition does as well. So when I see some other governor doing something that I haven't done, I come right back and raise holy heck with my staff saying, why haven't we done this? Why am I not as good as Michelle on this particular subject? And that competition really works. Look, we went to Scandinavia. We did kind of a clean energy tour last month of the Scandinavian countries. I come back and I find out they are harvesting energy in their sewage system. So as water comes back, it has heat in it. They're using heat exchangers to harvest that heat and use it to heat their water as it goes back in their domestic supply. They don't use the same water, they just use the energy from it. Why are we not doing this in the state of Washington? I'm a competitive creature, and now I want to come back and compete with them using that kind of technology. So both those meet. But I'll just point out the biggest efforts ahead of us. Two things we need to up our game on. One, we have to do better into making sure we have a national grid, and that we have a grid and intertie systems that really allow us to wheel solar power and wind power most effectively across state lines. That means we have to have a much more regionally efficient grid systems. That's number one. And number two, coming to common markets as we build market systems to have a common market really reduces the cost of credits on these markets. That has some challenges to make sure that we work across state lines to do that. That will be the next great horizon of our cooperation. So we've got some great work to do in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to, please join me in thanking Governor Lujan Grisham, Governor Inslee for their time today. They are moving the ball forward. They're why the U.S. stayed at COP and stayed on the international stage during the 4 years that we did not have national leadership, and you are going to continue to move it forward. I think we all have a lot of confidence in that. So thanks for the work you're doing in your states, and thanks for being with us today, and thanks to all of you.
Yeah, I want to get it back.